Unfortunately, Brittany is not here yet, so figured why not have this stream anyways? Because I want to show you some cool things that we're working on in the technical writing world, and some things that I've learned from the Splunk team, which Brittany is a part of, and she has. They have written a book called The Product is Docs. Highly recommend that you check it out. It's one of the best books on documentation, and it can be found right on Amazon. This is one of the books that really helped inspire me to uh, one, write better documentation, communicate with the product team better, engineers better, just to ensure that documentation was an integral part of the product development lifecycle. And some things I'll be showing you today here on the call are things that we've been working on at Technical Writer HQ, and other projects that we've been working on, whether that be software related, to ensure that we have great information architecture. And a lot of the learnings were taken from the Splunk team that Brittany is a part of. So one of the things that we've been working on is understanding, what the future of Google looks like tied into information. Oh, there we go. It looks like Brittany's joining us right now, and we're going to go ahead and rock and roll.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Brittany, great to have you here. I was just talking about the Splunk team, the awesome work that you've guys done in terms of documentation and really setting the tone for just having great resources for other technical writers to learn from. And it's helped me significantly. I came across the Project Docs book on Amazon, and have recommended to a number of people who have gotten a lot of value from it. So just to start off, if you can talk a little bit about who you are and what you do, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, my name is Brittany. I currently work at Splunk as a senior tech writer, and I am tasked with documenting all of the policies and procedures that make the support organization function properly. So, from the time a support engineer gets a case from a customer to the very end is what I document.
And I would love to hear the journey of how you got into this role. Many people don't necessarily define themselves as technical writer early on. They don't even know that technical writing exists until later on in their career. Was this something that you knew about early on? How did you get into it?
Well, I actually didn't. So I initially went to college for computer information systems, and the math was going to be the death of me. So I switched over to something that partnered what I love to do in general, which is writing, but still have the technical side of potentially going into like IT and stuff. And that's how I came across technical communications. So I got a bachelor's of science in technical communications with an emphasis in writing and editing. And when I graduated, I immediately got a job doing commercial tax software documentation, and that was external facing. And then just kind of went from there. I went from that company to IBM, and I went strictly internal, writing dev documentation and actually using Splunk software. And that's how I ended up getting on with Splunk, is because I knew how to use the software.
And I would love to hear about some of the challenges with these environments that you are working in. So it seems like there are some um, really interesting subject matters that you'd have to learn and really become an expert in. And it doesn't sound like they're easy. You just mentioned, taxes. And I think when people think about taxes, like this last thing they really want to dive into and learn. And then you talked about working with developer documentation, which is a whole nother learning curve. So what were those learning curves like for you, and how did you overcome those challenges?
I think the key when it comes to being a technical writer is understanding that you just aren't going to know everything. So when it came to like the commercial tax software, we had to know like international law, laws for the US. And what it came down to was just having a basic understanding. And once you have the basic ground understanding, you can kind of build anything onto it. And the same thing works with developers. I mean, I learned everything from some languages like JavaScript, C Sharp, but I don't know them enough necessarily to do it myself, but I just needed to get the basic understanding. And that could range from I read some books, I've read blogs, specifically talking to developers and actually seeing them do it. Um, it just kind of depends on the person. That's the interesting thing about tech writing, in my opinion, is like one person could do it hands on and learn the whole thing, versus somebody else could just read about it and then be good to go. So I did a combination of both.
Wow. And what were some of the things that have really helped you with communication among SMEs and also among other technical writers that you've worked with? Is it, things like, hey, setting good expectations, maybe deliverables, and maybe there's a certain way you do that. I think having good context there will help a lot of people who are they have this idea of like, hey, I'm going to jump in. I'm not going to understand the subject. How am I going to work with my teammates and all of that? So that context will really help them out.
Yeah, I think when it comes to tech writing, the key is to not forget that they are humans. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the task complete of trying to build something out. But when you remember when you're communicating with your SMEs or with even other tech writers that, hey, sometimes it just going that extra distance of being a little relatable on like a day-to-day function can create that trust for people to communicate with you. So really just good communication um, sets the standards for everything else that happens around you, and really gauging who you're communicating with. um, for example, developers, well, not all developers, but a lot of developers are more introverted. So, keeping in mind, 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to communicate via, Slack or email. They probably feel more comfortable with that. So, make sure you're tailoring your work around those communication methods, just being aware of how different people communicate.
And one of the most common questions we get, which is I feel very in line with this, is that is technical writing a introverted job? Because many people who consider themselves introverted say, "Oh, I think I found the perfect job for me." And technical writing looks very different for goes across every industry pretty much.
Mhm.
What would your advice be for people who are looking for more introverted work and are thinking about technical writing?
If you're thinking of getting into technical writing and you're introverted, it's going to test your introvertedness. As someone that is pretty introverted, I had to get comfortable with the idea of constant communication. It doesn't matter if you're doing customer facing or internal documentation. You could be doing marketing materials, communications that are going to the masses. You have to get past being in yourself. So I would suggest to anybody, um, just kind of force yourself past your comfort zone. If you get to a point where you're working and you're like, ooh, I need to talk, but I don't want to, that's when you really have to push yourself. Yeah, I mean, and you can, do things like emailing first or sending instant messages first, but ultimately you're going to have to communicate outside yourself. So, yeah, you just have to work with that.
I think that's also, one of the things that I believe people forget is technical writing is also referred to as technical communication for that exact
Yes.
reason. Um,
Yes.
and I think it's people get lost in the terminology a little bit and they forget about that. One of the things
Yes.
that I know people would love to hear is what are some of the cooler pieces of documentation that you've worked on that you've really enjoyed? And can you give us a little context and story behind those?
I absolutely loved working on developer documentation. And for me, I loved it so much because initially I wanted to be a computer scientist. So, in being a technical writer working with developers, it set me up to learn computer science, without actually having to do it myself. So, in the process of writing for these developers, doing things like how to send things to production or specific scripts, things like that, I've learned how to code myself. Um, and I don't do that now as much, but I do still have to code even on the back end of our pages to make them function. And that's something that I've always really enjoyed. Like, and I hope I can go back to developer writing.
And I know for many people who will be watching this video, when they hear the word code, they get a little bit nervous. It's like, oh, what does that mean? Does that mean I need to take 6 months out of my life to learn this particular language? Or does that mean that maybe I just start with like XML and take a few courses on there? What would you say is maybe an easy way to get started with just being more familiar with code and not feeling like it's this big thing that you got to, you know, take control of and it's this big challenge?
Um, there's a lot of free tools out there like Khan Academy and things like that that you can take a basic like HTML course. It's nothing crazy. It just kind of introduces you to some of the more common tags that are used in coding and just running off of that and really exposing yourself to the code is going to be the only way to, get yourself oriented to it. From my experience, I took one Khan Academy class and I was thrown in the water. So I didn't have a chance to get any formal training or anything like that. I just hopped in and learned as I went. So I wouldn't stress about classes or anything. Just if it's something that you want to learn, there's free resources. But when you get into the environment that requires it, you will learn it simply by just doing it. So, yeah, I wouldn't stress about going to learn it specifically.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard to learn things from a theoretical level if you're not applying it,
Yes.
especially in your job role. It may be you're applying it in a very specific way that wasn't part of any of the courses that you took. So it can be, yeah, I think finding out the relevant pieces is sometimes a hard thing to do, but it's like, what are you going to be using? And maybe always asking that question.
Yes.
I just want to thank David for commenting in the chat here. He says he's a self-taught developer and he's looking to become a technical writer. And I know many developers and engineers are looking to become technical writers. Do
Mhm.
you see that at Splunk or any of your previous roles, many engineers stepping into that role? And what does that look like for them?
I've actually seen more of like the opposite, where the tech writer gets exposed to development and then it's like, I want to go over to the dev side. Because typically most developers are like, I don't want to write anything. I just want to send my code to production and that's it. But the advantage of being the developer and then going over to tech writing is the languages. So it kind of gives you an advantage depending on the environment you're in. If you're going to a company and you're doing internal documentation for dev and you already know how to do dev, you do you have dual benefit. You can actually work on code and document how you're doing it. So it's a good benefit. I don't see it very often, but it's quite the combination.
Yeah, you become some deadly skills put together. Uh,
Yes.
And one of the things that, when people hear the word Splunk, they think of a great culture of documentation. I'd love to dive into the subject and for you to provide some details on how your team and how Splunk has established that culture.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, when I got hired on to Splunk, the support organization in particular had never had tech writers. Everything was either tribal knowledge or was written by managers kind of on the fly. It was nothing really organized. So, what we wanted to create was like a one stop shop. And we have kind of built on that over the 3.5 years I've been at Splunk. So, we just kind of have worked directly with like the support engineers and the managers and just ask them directly, what do you need? Where are our gaps? And that when we first filled those gaps, and then at that point, then we could expand onto other things. And it's created this environment of consistency that's spanned all over the place. So yeah, we it was interesting to come into a very large company that had never had any writers before. So we did everything from creating the templates for the documentation to the process to build the documentation. Like we created the Jira service desk, you know, and that kind of set the standard for everybody else around
And
us.
I'm curious of how do you get buy-in to something like that? Because I know technical writers really struggle with getting buy-in to this idea of documentation. And it's sort of one of those things where it's like, hey, we'll think about it later. I know it's important, but not right now. And how do you get people to focus on it?
So when I'm in a situation where people are pushing back on documentation, I always present it to them in the perspective of this will make your job easier. So if we have this written down and we can get more people to do this consistently, that's less problems for you to have to solve, the person, behind the documentation. So here, let's just get it in writing so that we can make your job easier. It's all about the benefits for the SME, not necessarily for the person doing the task.
Very true. And I'm curious of the different levels of documentation that you do. I know that people are moving more towards also creating more video documentation.
Mhm.
Reason for that is you have like tools like Loom that have come out that you no longer need to do like video editing, but you can just do a quick snippet and include it with your docs. Um, are there things with the documentation that you're producing over at Splunk or your previous roles that you feel like are really adding some extra context to help um, set expectations with communication and just provide another level of detail?
I know one thing that we're expanding on is interactive workflows. So, tools like Lucidchart allow you to create workflows that you can embed links into. We can embed pop ups into these. So, if somebody like hovers over a step in the process, it has a quick pop up. That's something we're really trying to expand on with Splunk being a predominantly tribal knowledge type environment. There isn't a lot of visualization of what they have to do. So with those interactive workflows, we're able to create the visual, but also create the perspective of how the whole thing works with those workflows.
That's super cool. Yeah. I know Lucidchart is a great tool. I've heard of a number of people using them. And yeah, I think being able to provide workflow documentation like that and trying to just do it within, step-by-step procedures versus like an actual, I guess, more graphical is completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And curious, some of the things that you feel like have really worked for you in terms of enabling a career of longevity within technical writing. So skills that you feel like have maybe just stood out for you. Like, hey, these are some skills that have really made a difference for me. What would those look like?
I would definitely say learning a little bit about the languages has helped me. Um, Jira, knowing a lot about Jira has definitely been an incentive for a lot of companies working with me because Jira Jira creates a tracking process, and being able to track means you can create metrics. When you can create metrics, you can show incentive, and when you can show incentive, you can monetize those things. So definitely getting a grasp on tools that manage whole processes of launching things is beneficial in my opinion.
And when it comes to these tools, I think some people think they have to be an expert in them.
Mm-mm.
And what is sort of the level of knowledge that you need to be able to be like, I feel comfortable using Jira, or even just feeling comfortable putting on your resume rather than having an imposter syndrome and being like, well, I don't want to claim I'm an expert in anything.
Yeah, I think the key is to just be honest initially of like, hey, I don't know everything about this, but as long as you know how to open it, you know how to move Jira's through the Jira process based on the project that is set up under. That's all you should really need to get started. And as you go, you will learn the other layers, like, things like workflows and what the different statuses do. But just knowing how to get into Jira and move requests through the process is a good start.
Yeah, I think it's people sometimes view software as very complex, and then once they take a little bit of time, they're like, "Hey, this is not as complex as I thought it was." Um,
Yeah.
Very real thing. I would say on the other side, you do have some really complex technical writing software that does exist. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And one of the questions I love to ask because I feel like it really helps provide some like new ideas, and also it's always important to look where industries are going.
Mhm.
Where do you see the future of technical writing going? And I know it's a really broad question, but feel free to just take the question and wherever you see aligns with things that you've been thinking about with the future of this industry.
I know content management is going to the next level in that most people have worked, a basic wiki situation or had a very basic website that they launch their documentation to. And we're taking things to the next level of interactivity, like where we're embedding this documentation into the tools people are using. For example, like SFDC, pop ups throughout the actual user interface. And I think that is going to take educating the customer or whoever's receiving your content to the next level. Instead of having that website that's over here, it's actually going to be in the user interface, and that creates like efficiency with doing tasks and things. So I'm personally really looking forward to seeing some of like the software that's out right now expanding, or even just new software coming out to be able to integrate into some of the tools that a lot of people are using. That would be
100%. Yeah, I think you mentioned Lucidchart is one that tool's doing
mhm.
that. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I gotta go ahead and check that out. I
Yeah.
could just imagine as things are moving more topic-based, it's like you don't wanna open up a whole nother tab to maybe view a paragraph of information. Like, why can't I just see it right there, and hover over it?
Exactly. Exactly. Or like Madcap Flare allows you the ability to use what they call GUI numbers. And essentially, you would put that GUI number on the page, and it would automatically attach to whatever part of the UI that GUI is assigned to. So if you're in the middle of completing a task, oh shoot, I don't know how to do this, you would just click help icon, and whatever user guide page that you created in regards to that topic would automatically pop up. Like, I think that is like the best thing ever, and it's a time saver. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that expanding.
It's like magic. It's funny how long it's taken for it to come. It seems like, in hindsight bias, you're like, "Wow, it makes so much sense." And you're like, "Gosh, how come this wasn't here before?" But it's just the way of the world, right? Uh,
Exactly.
and for many of the people watching this video, they're wondering, how do I break into technical writing? And one of the questions I like to ask along with this is, if you were looking to add a technical writer to your team, what are the qualities you would look for in them? And that way they have some idea of how to work their way backwards.
Yeah. So one, I would need to see your writing ability. So 9 times out of 10, expect to do like a writing sample for whatever company you're interviewing for. Um, and the ability to evolve is a big thing. Tech right now is fast paced. Everything's evolving quickly. And if you are looking for a firm, stable environment, I probably would say tech writing isn't for you. But if your ability to adapt and evolve is there, you're good to go. Really, just about how well can you write and how well can you adapt. Those are my two biggest things.
And I know we covered a lot here today. Is there anything else that you feel like could help people make the next step in their career with breaking into technical writing and succeeding on the job?
Yeah, I would say write as much as you can. And not just like, brain dumping your thoughts. If you see anywhere, like at your current job, that there's no documentation, write it. If in your daily life there's a tool you're using and you're having to do something and you don't have it written anywhere, or you can't find it in a user guide, write it down. Those are the things that start to work your brain muscles to get you prepared to do tech writing. And then when you actually try to get into the field, you have writing samples simply by documenting things on a daily basis that otherwise don't have documentation.
Yeah, it's almost by making your own life easier, you'll have your portfolio, which
Exactly. Yeah, like I used to work in mortgage servicing, totally opposite of where I am now. And they had no documentation for how to do anything. So as I was doing different tasks, I just wrote it down. And over time, I cleaned it up and cleaned it up. And then when I got my degree and they asked me for writing samples, it was like, oh, well, I actually have these. I didn't intentionally write them to have them as writing samples, but it ended up working in my favor. So write as much as possible, even if you don't feel like it. Write.
Well, Brittany, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. And if people want to connect with you, I'm going to go ahead and put your LinkedIn profile in the description below this video. So make sure to go ahead and check out the description so you can connect with Brittany. And again, thank you. And we'll go ahead and rock and roll from here.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.